Right, so we're on PARSHA Mishpatim. If you remember, last week was a big week. We received the Torah in PARSHA Yisro, and then this PARSHA begins with what we call Mishpatim. Mishpatim are laws that in general seem to be logical. They're laws primarily between people, man and man, and it just seems to be that this we had last week, we giving you the Torah. Now they're starting to tell us what's in the Torah. So, but oddly enough, it begins with a vav. It's like beginning not only a sentence or a paragraph. You're starting an entire chapter with the word and. Right? A vav is and. Right? It's an and. Right? Like who starts a chapter or a sentence with the word and? Because by definition, it's not the beginning of a sentence. It's saying there was something before it, right? And so here it begins by saying V'ela hamishpatim, and these are the mishpatim, right? The laws, right? The civil laws, asher tasim lifnehem, that I will place before you. So, and now he's going to talk about these types of laws. So the first thing everyone asks, and Rashi clearly asks, like, what's the deal with this vav? And these are the laws. Well, what was before it? It just started. So he tells us that usually when you begin a sentence with the word Eila, these, it comes to tell you to exclude what we just finished. In other words, I'm going to say, all people are greedy, and then I'll tell you John is greedy. So by telling you John is greedy, I'm saying that the first part of the sentence doesn't really apply anymore. Because otherwise, of course, John is greedy because everybody is greedy. So I would say, so here the Rashi is telling us it's a grammatical reality. That whenever you begin a sentence by saying these, it means that what we said before no longer counts. Only from this point on, this counts. And but when you say and these, it's telling you a general rule and a specific rule, and one does not disqualify the other. So they're both accurate. So it's tying the two together. That's what and does. So here it begins with and these, which means it's attaching itself to what was before, which is the laws of of sacrifices. It has to do with the altar and the giving of the Torah. That's what we had before, right? So it's telling us a very important rule. That most of us believe that there are laws in the Torah and laws in the world that are logical laws, like murder, rape, theft. These are all logical. And for no other reason, I won't steal from you so that you don't steal from me. Right? I won't kill someone so that nobody kills me. That's the most logical basis for it, right? I want to have a fair society, so I won't be violent so that others won't be violent. Right? That's the idea. Right? But the Torah is telling us here, according to how Rashi and others interpret it, that is not true. That if the Torah did not tell the world that these things were forbidden, then they would be permissible. And people would not think that it's logical. The reason that we believe that these things are logical is because the entire world has accepted these as true. But they come from the Torah. That there were a time when you had pagans in the world, right? And the pagans did not believe in the supremacy of human life. And therefore that the human life was not so important. So the idea of murder not necessarily was such a big deal as it is with us. Maybe, and then how did they define murder? This week we had this decision by the Supreme Court that doctors now are allowed to assist people to commit suicide in certain situations. If a person is mentally sound and they tell the doctor that I'm in great pain, I'm not going to get better, I want you to assist me in killing myself, the doctors, as a part of being a doctor, are allowed to do this. Now, it's not finished yet, but the Supreme Court is saying we can't say that they're unable to do it. That much they would say. Now, what they've just done, maybe that wasn't their intent, but what they just did was they redefined murder. Because up until now, if a doctor helps someone kill themselves, the doctor is guilty of participating in a murder. Killing oneself is a form of murder. And if somebody comes and says, I want to die, would do me a favor, here's $10,000, kill me tomorrow. But the person kills him is still murder. So why would it not be with a doctor? So by virtue of that is that they're saying that that's no longer murder. right? And we have all types of examples of this, right, all over where different things can redefine something. And here we redefine murder. And we ask ourselves this question many times: is abortion murder? Is euthanasia murder? Right? What is the definition of murder? Is self-defense murder? And if somebody comes to kill you and you kill them, is that murder? We don't know. How do we know it's not? So the fact is here that in all of these cases, the answer to these questions comes from the Torah. And therefore also the basic rule that you shouldn't murder comes from the Torah. Even if there's logic in it, we understand that it's really only logical because the Torah says so. And then the Torah goes even further. Like, the world would never come up with many of the laws that we come up with. Like, I travel sometimes and I go on a plane or a bus or somewhere, and there'll be people in there and they'll be talking about office politics between them, and they'll destroy people in their conversations and not think anything of it. If I would say to them, it's not nice to gossip, they would agree. It's not nice to gossip, but everyone does. You buy newspapers, they're full of gossip. So the answer is that if I said to them, it's a divine statement from God that you should not gossip, they think I'm crazy, right? But we have such a rule called lashon hara. We're not allowed to talk like that about people. And I'd say, even if it's true, you're not allowed to talk about it. And they'd say, what do you mean it's true? Of course we can. And the answer is no, you can't. You're not supposed to speak badly of others. And that's a Torah rule. So the fact that people have some concept of it, they still don't know the answers. We have one country that says abortion's allowed. One country says, no, if you commit abortion, then you're murdering. Another one says, no, you commit abortion, it's not right, but it's not murder. Another one says, no, a woman's body is a woman's body, that she can do what she wants with it. So every one of these people have a basis for what they say. So which one's right? It's either right or wrong. It can't be both. So society, right, gives us its feelings, and therefore when we talk about murder and we talk about stealing and we talk about rape and we talk about the definition of death and the definition of life, we have meaning to that, and that comes from the Torah. It doesn't come from the world, right? The world doesn't have it, and that's why this parsha begins. And these are the civil laws. These are the laws between people, and these laws are as much from God as the laws of keeping Shabbos and keeping kosher and keeping Passover are from God. Nobody questions that keeping Shabbos comes from God. But people would say, murder, stealing. So we're saying, no, these are divine laws also. And that they're just as significant as any other law. And that they, just like the laws of keeping Shabbos and kosher and Passover and all of these things come from the Torah, so too the laws of civil actions, of how you act, of how you treat people, of how you do business, about honesty, about what is life, what is death. And that's why the parsha begins with Ve'ela ha-Mishpatim. And just like these laws having to do with the building of an altar to offer sacrifices came from the Torah, so too these laws that we're about to tell you come from the Torah. And then they pick a number of laws, and how do they see them? Right? So they say, the first one they come up with is an odd one. You'd say, imagine the Jews came out of Egypt 7 weeks ago. They got the Torah. Now they're going to start teaching them the Torah. Most are going to teach them the Torah. So what is he going to teach them? All right, we can understand he wants to teach them Mishpatim, right? Civil laws. So which civil laws? He used to teach them civil laws that are really important. Murder. Teach them about murder. Teach them about rape. Teach them about the concept of marriage. Don't teach them other things, right, that seem to be insignificant. So what is the first thing it tells us? If you have a Hebrew slave, you can have him for 6 years, and in the 7th year he goes free. Well, first thing is, these are a bunch of slaves. Just came out of Egypt 7 weeks ago. Where are they going to get a slave? Right? That's first. Secondly is, they couldn't have a slave for 6 years because they didn't even have the Torah for 6 days. How could they have a slave? Where would it come from? So why do we begin with that? So the commentaries tell us the reason that the Torah begins with the concept of slavery we can understand it 2 ways. One is that when a person experiences something, they become very sensitive to that thing. But after a while, they become callous to it. For instance, I know of a guy who was a Holocaust survivor. And in the Holocaust, he was around 14 years old. and he escaped from a train that was taking him to Auschwitz. And he went out into the woods and he lived with the partisans for a number of years, right? And he slept on the ground, and he had, he ate whatever he could find, and he's set to kill the Germans and to destroy what the Germans were doing, together with these other sort of unofficial soldiers who were hiding with him, right? So throughout the whole time he stayed observant as a religious Jew, and then he comes out, the war's over, he comes to America, he gets married, and he has a child. Right? Now his child is old enough to go now to university. And he has a choice between a university in a large metropolitan area that has a large Jewish community where he can have everything he needs, or he can go to another university which is just as good in the middle of nowhere that doesn't have much of a Jewish community and doesn't have all the things he needs. So he tells his son to go to that one, the one without the community. And he says, why? He says, because I had to go through this, right, during the war, where I was all by myself. I was the only Jew. I had to keep all of the Jewish laws by myself. I had the Nazis chasing me. I had the partisans with me, right, and they weren't Jewish. So, if I did it and I came out strong, then I want you to have the same opportunity. That's a mistake. It's a mistake to do that, right? That was his challenge. That's not his child's challenge, right? The fact is that very often when you have experienced something yourself, later on, when somebody else talks about it, you think that they should experience the same suffering that you did in order for them to come out. Like when we were young, we were poor. So then now I worked hard to have a lot of money, and my kids want things. Well, if they get things, right? Because they come from a wealthy family, so they're going to become spoiled. So I'm going to treat them and raise them as if we're poor, and I'm not going to get them any of these things, nothing, because I want them to grow up with the strength and the fortitude of a poor person who grows up and appreciates what they have. Well, that makes no sense. Right? You work in order to make a better life for your children, and then you don't give them a better life because you think that they should go through what you went through in order to come out good. Right? The way the person thinks this way is because when they experienced the suffering, they saw that they made it and they came through, and the suffering made their life in the end made it better, right? So that they became who they were. But that doesn't mean it's what we want to do. It just happens with some people. They're successful at it, but that's not what you really want. But it's hard for a person who experienced it to often be able to see that. So here, by definition, the Jews were slaves. Now they're coming out, and Hashem is saying, I'm going to seize the moment. Right now they were slaves, and they know how painful it was to be slaves. I'm going to tell them right now the laws of how you have to treat a slave. Because if I don't, they're going to start to think, no big deal to make a slave suffer. We suffered, and look how we came out. So I'll make my slave suffer, so that in the end he'll come out a better person. And God says, no. Right now you're still sensitive to the pain of being a slave, right? You got to remember that when you have a slave. Don't remember that you made it. Remember how hard it was. So you shouldn't do that to someone else. So Hashem seizes the moment and tells the Jews who were slaves 2 months ago, you have to treat people better than that, right? Not just like that, but different. And that's why the first thing he talks about is a Jewish slave. So it says if a person acquires a Hebrew slave, for 6 years that slave should work for him, and the 7th year he goes free, right? So that we just said. Now, here's an interesting line next. It says, Im begapo yavo, if he comes with gapo, we have to see what that is, begapo yetze, he should come out with the gapo. So he came in with something called a gapo, became a slave, he had with him this gapo. When he leaves, he should take it with him. In other words, he doesn't lose it. Right? Im bal isha, who, if he was a married person when he became a slave, the yatse ishto imo, he should, when he's freed as a slave, he should be able to free his wife as well. Right? So the commentaries all ask, what is this gapo? So one of the commentaries explained it means his clothing. He had a coat. Right? He had a coat, and if he came in with his coat, he goes out with his coat. You don't make him leave his coat behind because he was your slave. He can take it with him. But they explain that with a coat doesn't mean literally a coat like we wear. It's a symbol. It's a symbol. A single man enters into something with his coat. A married man is much different. A single man, right, the extent of who he is ends at his coat. He only thinks about himself. He has no one else to think about. He has no wife. He has no kids. He only has himself. So his interest is in himself, in me. So my interest ends at my coat when it goes beyond me. If I come in with my coat, that's all I got is my coat. That's all I care about. Right? Then I go out with my coat. That's what a single man is. When a single man gets married, he now takes his coat and he puts it over his wife also. There's now two of them, and his kids. So that therefore, if you when you deal with a man who's married, right, he always sees himself as two people. Right? He sees himself as him and his wife. That's who he is. Before he's married, he's just him, just me. Right? And then as he has children, it expands. So if he comes in with just his coat, he goes out with just his coat. But if he comes in with a wife, he goes out with a wife. That's what it says. And that's what it's telling us. But it's at a very interesting point that a person, right, who's a man who's not married, sees himself only as being self-interested. Right? And then when he gets older, he starts to learn through marriage of being careful for someone else. And you see this in many ways. In the book of Ruth, it says that Ruth says to Boaz, "Spread your coat over me." She says, right, what does she mean? I want you to marry me. Right? She comes out in the field and she sees Boaz and he sees her and he shows an interest. So she says, "Spread your coat over me." That means I want to get married. Right? We also have in a lot of places, the Sephardic people and the German Jews have a custom at their wedding that the groom puts on a tallis and then he spreads the tallis over the bride during the wedding ceremony so that they're both under the tallis, as a symbol that now she and him are in the same clothing. It's now my clothing are just not my clothing. My clothing are your clothing, and your clothing, I take care of you. Right? That's how it is. So that's what it's referring to. That it teaches us an important lesson of how a person looks at things. That's why the Talmud says that a man is not a complete man until he's married. It doesn't say this about a woman. It says a man is not complete because a man only thinks of himself before he's married. He doesn't think about women, like being married to someone. He doesn't think about children. He doesn't think about responsibility. He's free to do whatever he wants to do. He's got no responsibilities. He's a man on his own. So he becomes complete when he starts to think of someone else. When he gets married, he's now responsible for his wife. He's now responsible for his family. So it broadens his definition of who he is. Then he becomes a complete man. Right? That's why it says that in the Torah, if you read the story in the creation story, it sounds like there's two creation stories. One of them, it seems to say that God created Adam as a multi-gendered person, that it was Adam and Eve were attached to each other. They were one person. The first story says male and female he created them, right? That he was made as man and woman. Then the second story seems to be that God makes Adam fall asleep and he takes a rib and he creates a woman, right? So that's a different story. So either God created a man as a man and a woman and then he separated them, or he created them as two separate things. Which is it? The Torah seems to say both. So the Talmud says the answer to this is that the Torah is telling us in the first case that God's original desire was to create man as a multi-gendered entity. But then he saw that the man would not be able to understand chesed, kindness, how to act to people, take care of people, as long as he was self-sufficient. Right? If he was male and female, he could reproduce, he could do everything all by himself. He didn't need anybody. So God said, no, that's not good. I need to split them. So what it says, the second section of the creation story is the way God actually did it, which was he created man and then woman. But his intent was really to create man as both. That's why you find by human beings we have a partner, a spouse. Maybe animals, they just reproduce. They have no spouse in general. Right? Every time they have an urge to reproduce, they go to a different female. They don't care. There's no feelings. There's no relationship. But by humans there is. That's why the creation story is written that way, and that's what it's referring to here. Right? The same idea. Right? So then it says, it goes on with some more laws, what happens. But then it talks about, on the top of the next page, what happens at the end of the 6 years. The 7th year he goes free. He doesn't want to go. The slave doesn't want to go. He wants to stay. He likes it. He doesn't want to have to take care of himself. He doesn't have to worry about making choices and decisions. What am I going to eat for dinner? What are we going to do? Where are we going to live? Right? He doesn't want to make those decisions. He just wants to be able to have a simple life. So for 6 years, he had a simple life. The master takes care of everything, gives him a bed, gives him food, gives him a wife, gives him everything. Right? Now at the end of 6 years, he's got to go free. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want all that. So that's a very good question. How do we deal with that then? If that's the case, where a person right doesn't want to go free, so he says, okay, he doesn't have to. What he has to do then is that, as it says right in the top, he says, Im Omar, he says, Yomar Eved, the slave says, Avdi es Adoni, I love my master, V'es Ishti, and the wife that he gave me, V'es Banai, and the children he gave me, V'yotze Chavshi. I don't want to leave, I don't want to go out. So it says, V'yigishu Adonav El HaElohim, V'yigishu El Adeles, or as a mezuzah, V'ratz Adonav as Azno. It says that the master takes him to the doorpost like this, where we have the mezuzah, and puts his ear against the doorpost, and takes an awl, like a nail, and a hammer, and puts a hole in his ear. And that's a symbol forever that he's a slave, and he'll remain a slave. So the commentaries ask, what the heck's going on? Like, what do you put a hole in his ear? Right? So it says, Rashi quotes from the Talmud, says, the ear that heard at Sinai that I am your master, God is your master, right, didn't listen, and it wants a human as his master. So therefore, the ear is the problem, so they put a hole in the ear to remind the person that you're making a mistake. You should have your own life. You should make your own decisions, and you should follow God, not a master. Right? Now you've got two masters. You've got God and a master. You just need God. Right? But the problem with it is that his ear didn't do anything wrong. I mean, let's be serious. His ear is independent of him. It's his brain, really. His brain didn't process what because you can't stop hearing. Like if you're standing at Mount Sinai and God's talking to you, you can't turn it off. You're going to hear it. So why didn't he do it? Right? Because he didn't listen. Like, he didn't put it into his brain. So we should put a hole in his brain, not in his ear. Like, why do they put a hole in his ear rather than his brain? Because his brain is really the one that did wrong, not his ear. So the answer is that it really is his ear. Because what he did is that he closed off his ability to hear something so that he wouldn't have to process it. He chose. He had what my wife likes to call with me selective hearing. You hear what you want to hear, right? That's what he did. And therefore he didn't allow it to go past his outer ear into him, inside, and that's why he's punished, because God does not want people to remain this way. Being a slave is a privilege. It's a privilege because how do you become a slave, a Hebrew slave? Let's say somebody steals, and he steals $100,000, and then he gets caught, and he goes to court, and they say, not only is this your punishment, but you have to pay back the $100,000. Well, if he stole the $100,000, he clearly doesn't have it. He spent it, right? I mean, that's why he stole it. So now, where's he going to get $100,000? If he had to steal it the first time, he's going to have to steal it again. He's not going to be able to have it. So the Torah gives him the privilege of becoming a slave. In the rest of the world, they put him in debtor's prison until he died there. There's no way out. He had no way of getting the money. He's in jail. But in the Torah it says, no, you can go and be a slave to the man you owe money to for 6 years. At the end of the 6 years, you owe him no more money. It's paid because you were there for 6 years. And now you go out free with a blank slate. You have no debt. Right? So you see how people live with debt their whole life? You get into debt and then your whole life is a mess because you owe so much money you'll never get out of it. Right? This is the Torah gives a way to do it, to accomplish it, where the person who he stole from gains, right, and the person who did it has a way out, right, and it's a dignified way of doing it. So that's what happens. For a person to want to stay like that, it shows a lack of understanding. Now another question they ask is, why the master? The master, all he's being is a nice guy, so that the slave wants to stay with him. Why the master has to be the one who puts the hole in his ear? I wouldn't want to do that. Like if I was a nice guy and I was treating somebody with a lot of respect and treating him nice and he wants to stay in my house because of it, right, I certainly wouldn't want to go and take a nail and put a hole in his ear. Like it would be like, why should I be punished and have to do that? I'm not an executioner. Get some executioner to do it. So the answer is that I'm responsible also. Even though I was kind and I was dignified, part of my job as the master is to teach him to be responsible for himself. Clearly, a guy's going to steal, he's not responsible for himself. He doesn't realize the effect of the ramifications of stealing, right? They say if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. If he's going to steal the money, he's going to end up losing everything and becoming a slave because of it, right? I should teach him that's not how you should be. I should teach him to be honest. I should teach him to work hard. I should teach him to have the good work ethic and to take care of things, be responsible. That's what I should do as his master. And I didn't. I was too nice and too easy, and I made it that he wants to stay this way. That's not my goal. My goal is to make him want to be self-sufficient and not steal anymore and be able to work for a living and take care of himself and to feel good about it. But I didn't. So therefore, I was too nice. I was too easy. I spoiled him. Because of that, I carry some responsibility. Right? As a member of the community, as his master, I'm responsible for him, just like one Jew is always responsible for others. That's what it's saying here. Right? Then it goes into some other laws about the different types of slaves. I mean, it's interesting, but we don't need to deal with it. Let's see. So then the next thing is we have some examples of murder, where it talks about different definitions of murder. And this is where the Torah tells you. The Torah in last week's PARSHA said, thou shalt not kill. Right? You shall not murder. It's part of the Ten Commandments. This week they're telling you what that means. So you shouldn't think that it's just a man-made rule. So if it says that if one guy does something on purpose against another and he kills him, right, he should be killed. One who strikes his mother or father should be killed. One who kidnaps someone and sells them, right, he should be killed. One who curses his father and mother should be killed. Right? So there are examples saying that there are certain things that you can do that you've lost your right to live. Now, you realize in the Torah it's very, very rare that someone's actually killed. But what it's teaching you is the severity of what you're doing. When you curse your parents, it's the same punishment as if you strike your parents. It's the same punishment if you kill someone, because it's a serious thing. The Torah is telling you how serious it is, that it's a big deal, that a person has to act in a certain way. And that's why it's written here, but it's defining murder for us. It's giving us a definition of it. And then it goes on. It talks about if two people are arguing and then one person hits the other and he hurts them, right? What does he have to do? So it says you have to pay him for his lost work, and you have to pay for him to be healed. Right? That's the idea, right? Because it's showing you that even though you can say, what do you mean? He's my slave. Who cares what I do? I'm his master. He has to listen to me. He's not listening, so I strike him. No, you're not allowed to do that. Right? And if you do it, you're responsible. So that's what it's telling us here with anybody, any person. You hit someone, you say, well, what's it? My big deal. I hit somebody. He's going to get better. Right? I hit him. He gets a black and blue mark. In 3 days it goes away. So why do you punish me? Right? Well, it says you can't do that. And it talks about a man hitting a slave or a maid, and what happens. Now, there's a very interesting one on 422 and 423. In verse 22, it says, if men shall fight, and they collide with a pregnant woman, and she miscarries, but there will be no fatality. That means the woman doesn't die. He shall surely be punished as the husband of the woman shall cause to be assessed against him, and he shall pay it by the order of the judges. What you have here is a definition of abortion. Like, is aborting a fetus murder? Is aborting a fetus nothing? Is it just simply, I have to now pay the woman because I broke her arm? I made her abort her fetus, just like breaking her arm because part of her body? Or did I actually murder somebody? So here it's telling you that to cause a miscarriage, right, is wrong. You're not allowed to fight and strike someone. Here they even hit the woman by mistake. But even so, you are acting incorrectly, and anything that happens while you act incorrectly, you're responsible for. right? Like in the commission of a crime, something else happened. You're responsible for that because you were doing something wrong. You were fighting and you caused this. But it doesn't say that he's responsible for the murder of the fetus. So in that we learned that a fetus is not a full human being. So it's not like the Catholics say, right, who are pro-life, say that as soon as a baby is conceived, it's a human being and has the same rights as you and me. The Torah says no, it's not true. It's not nothing, because he still has to pay, but it's not a human. And that's the truth. That's how our definition of a fetus is that a fetus is a potential life. That if you allow that fetus to grow on its own and you don't do anything to it, it will be a person. Every day that it continues inside of its mother, it's more of a person, and its chance of living is greater. And if you stop that, then you haven't murdered anyone, but you have stopped someone from becoming a human. You haven't done nothing, but you haven't murdered. So our definition is that we're not pro-choice and we're not pro-life. We don't say that the baby is a human and therefore you can't abort it. If a woman's if the giving birth to a baby is gonna kill the woman's life comes first. So you can abort it. So clearly it's not a human being like the mother is. On the other hand, you can't have an abortion just because you want to, because it's birth control, because it's something in there, and and if you leave it alone, it will become a human. So it's greater than nothing, but it's not a human. Right? So our definition is different, but that's one of the places it comes from understanding this quote. And then we have one of the most biggest errors of understanding the Torah, which is verse 24. An eye for an eye, a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. So every one of these, right, it sounds like the Torah is telling you, you know what jurisprudence is? You know what going to court is? If you knock out someone's eye, the justice is he knocks out your eye. If you break someone's hand, he breaks your hand. Well, that's what it sounds like, and that's what most people outside of the Torah world understand it, but that's not what it means. It's telling you the price that you pay for doing this wrong. So it says like this, an eye. I have wounded somebody's eye. What is the payment? An eye. The cost of an eye. Right? So if a person, let's say a person's eye, let's say they're a jeweler and they use their eyes to judge jewelry, and now they can't because of you. You have to pay what they're going to lose because of that. If you break someone's foot and they don't use their foot much, so you pay, but you don't have to pay as much. If they're a soccer player, then you got to pay a lot, right? A foot for a foot, an eye for an eye. It doesn't mean that there's some type of justice to poke out somebody's eye. Right? That's not at all what it's saying. It's telling you you do something wrong to somebody's tooth. The payment for a tooth is the tooth, the worth of the tooth, not your tooth. What good is that? It's not going to make him any better, right? I knock out his tooth, so he can knock out my tooth. Does it make it that he's any better? He looks better? He can eat better? No. He's got a hole in his mouth still. Now I also do. It doesn't make anything better. So that's not what it means. And then it talks here about if an animal will inflict pain on a human. Like let's say an ox gores somebody. So maybe, how do we know an ox shouldn't be held accountable? Right? Or maybe not at all. So here it says the ox shall be stoned and you can't use it. Now, it doesn't mean that you stone the ox because he's guilty. Right? Oxes, animals, have no free will. They have no understanding. A dog bites because a dog bites, not because this is a bad dog. Because a dog bites. That's what they do. Right? It's like if you I tell people all the time, you bring a 2-year-old to shul and you think they're going to sit in shul and they act up, you can't get mad at the 2-year-old. They're acting like a 2-year-old. You can get mad at the parent for not thinking that a 2-year-old can't sit for 3 hours in shul quietly. It's not possible. So you make them do it, they're not doing anything wrong. So an animal, same thing. An animal has can't figure out, okay, if I bite this guy, maybe I'll go to jail, so I better not bite him. A dog doesn't even think about it. If the dog feels threatened, he'll bite you. What causes him to feel threatened? That's because he's a dog. He's not doing anything wrong. So then why do we kill him? Right? Like here an ox gores somebody. Why do we kill him? Because there's an understanding that an animal who does inflict pain on someone, there is something wrong with the animal. The animal gets it gets a taste of blood. It starts to feel, it's not afraid of humans. It starts to feel differently, and therefore there's no rehabilitating an animal. You have to kill it. That's what it's telling you, right? An animal is acting appropriately, but if you have a dog that's known to bite people, right? You're the problem because the dogs do that. But if you're not going to take care of it, then they're going to kill the dog. Not because he's doing something he shouldn't do. He should bite. That's what dogs do. But he's gotten used to doing it, so he's going to continue doing it. So we have to stop it. Right? That's really how it works. And that's what it's talking about here. Right? So the animal itself is not really guilty. The person is guilty. And it goes on. What happens if an animal hurts another animal? And what the rules are. Like what happens if my dog attacks your dog, and you now have to spend $5,000 at the vet because of my dog? Do I have to pay? It's not. I mean, dogs do that. Right? If my dog felt threatened by your dog, so right? How about if my dog does it 5 times to different dogs over the course of a year? Right. So it gives you all these laws about these things. And if Torah didn't tell us this, we wouldn't know this. Right? And it goes on through all different types of things. And here on 429, it talks about what if a man seduces a woman, but for bad purposes. He's not seducing her because he cares about her. He wants to have relations with her. So the last line: if a man shall seduce a virgin who is not betrothed and he lies with her, he shall provide her with a marriage contract as his wife. Right? In other words, if a man either rapes or he seduces a woman to have relations with him, and he has no real interest in marrying her, right? He's now affected her. So now he's required to marry her. She's not required to marry him, by the way. She can say no. But if she would want to, he has to do it, and he's not allowed to ever divorce her. Right? In other words, he's done this. She can, go to the court to get a divorce, right? Or she can not marry him in the first place, but his action, right, this is a part of the penalty he gets, because in some ways, right, Judaism has never looked at people as property, right? But there are, let's say an eligible bachelor who's a doctor is more eligible than an eligible bachelor who is an untrained person, right? Why? Because he has a career, he make a living, a good living. So not that a person who's not a doctor is worse. He's not worse, just different. That's all. There's just differences, right? So if let's say a woman want to marry this guy, he's a doctor, and then he's no longer, he can't be a doctor. Something happens. Somebody hits him with a car and breaks his hands, and he can't do surgery now. I mean, so that's an enormous effect, right? On them getting married, on their relationship. Right? I was listening to the news recently. There was a story about a woman who became a quadriplegic in a car accident, and she was talking about how a lot of her friends, they stopped dealing with her, but her boyfriend stayed with her. And the guy kept saying over and over, not only did he stay with her, but he'd only been her boyfriend for a month. Right? And the fact that he's now dedicated himself to spending his life with a woman who's a quadriplegic, who can't have children, who can't do anything, right? They were praising as being very, you see how strong his love is, right? So the fact that he did this, right, is showing that he has a care for the person. He loves the person, right? It's beyond what it is. But why does society think how great it is that he's doing this? Because most people wouldn't do this. They were dating someone for a month and they became a quadriplegic. That means I'm not going to have children now. I'm not going to have a normal life now. I can't go on a vacation with my wife. Has to be in a wheelchair or a bed all the time. Like, what kind of a life is that? People are going to say you shouldn't do it. It's not logical to do it. The fact that he went and did this goes against the norm of society. Right? Society would say not to, and it's the same idea with us. A woman who's a virgin, who's not been raped, has a higher self-esteem for herself than one who was. And it's not her fault, but it very often happens that they feel less of themselves. They feel like a victim. They feel that it's a little bit my fault. Maybe I did something I shouldn't do, even if she didn't. That's human nature. I do counseling. I come across this a lot, where a woman could be married to a guy and the guy's a horrible ogre, and she'll start saying it's her fault, right? Because she'll believe it's her fault, and it's not. It's very rare that it's black and white, but so I'm making it up. But people will do that kind of thing. So it's the same thing here, right? So he has to marry her because he's now caused her to be worth less, at least in her own eyes. But this is not a punishment for her, right? You don't think that she has to marry him because she let him rape her, right? That's not the case. And maybe she should have been smart and not walked around a dangerous area, right? That's not what it's talking about. She has no obligation to marry him. But if she wants to, he's obligated to marry her, and he's never allowed to divorce her. Right? And then we go into some other areas, but one of the interesting areas beginning here is, it talks here in verse 20, "You shall not taunt or oppress a stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not cause pain to any widow or orphan, and if you dare to cause him pain, or he shall cry out to me, I shall surely hear his outcry. My wrath shall blaze, and I shall kill you by the sword, and your wives will be widows, and your children orphans." So God is telling us a couple of things. One, he's telling us that you can't oppress a stranger. A stranger does not only mean a convert, it means a stranger also. That if a person comes into your community and they're different, you should not oppress them, you shouldn't be prejudiced against them, you shouldn't treat them badly. And he says, why? Because you were a slave in Egypt. So it's a funny statement, because what if we weren't slaves in Egypt? Would we be allowed to do it? Right? It doesn't make sense that we would. So he's telling us because you were a slave in Egypt is not the reason. He's reminding you of what it was like to be treated as outcasts. And it's very, if your whole life everybody loves you and you're like the hit of the party and you're the most popular person in school, and then you grow up and you're the most popular person in the area, you have no idea what it's like to be ostracized. So God's saying, remember when you were ostracized? You were in Egypt, the most powerful nation in the world, and you were just turned into slaves. Nobody cared about you, right? Remember that when you deal with people, right? Even if you didn't experience it, you still can't do it. But he's just using it as a frame of reference. And then he tells us about the widow and the orphan. And the widow and the orphan, God says, you better make sure you treat them right, because they have no one to take care of them. This is what happens. When somebody oppresses a widow, they're doing two things to her. Right? If let's say somebody is having a problem, right, and they come to me, and I don't help them. So I'm not helping someone who needs help. That's wrong. I have to help them. Right? Now a widow comes to me and needs help. So this is what goes through her head. Number one, what's with this guy? He won't help me. Right? Like I didn't help anyone else. But then she says, if my husband was alive, he would take care of this. He would help me. Is it right? But because my husband's not alive, the rabbi's not helping me. And the point is now she's going through two types of pain. One is she's being treated badly, and secondly is she's being reminded that she doesn't have a husband. Or an orphan. An orphan comes in, he needs something. No, I'm not going to give it to you. So if I had a father, you wouldn't treat me this way. If I had parents, you wouldn't do that. Right? Because I'm an orphan, you're doing it. Right? So he's reminded not only of the pain he's in, but the fact that he doesn't have parents, he's reminded of also. So he's inflicted twice. Right? Not only for what you're doing, but for the fact that he has no one to take care of him. So God says, I'm going to take this seriously. Don't you ever go after the weak. The weak are the orphans and the widows. Don't do that. You have to go out of your way for them to make sure that they're treated correctly. And if you don't, your wife will be a widow and your children will be orphans. In other words, it's a serious thing he's telling you. Right? I'll kill you. You won't be around. And there's always amazing stories about different individuals in history who have really taken this extremely seriously. You should take it seriously. We have stories of things they did. They tell a story about the Netziv, who was a great rabbi 100 years ago. And he was in one of the last generations in Europe. And it says that one time he went on a trip, and he came back and he bought his wife this crystal vase, really a beautiful one, very expensive. And he brought it back for her, and she tells the maid, take care of this, whatever you do, don't break it. It's very expensive, and I really love it. My husband just gave it to me. And of course, the more you tell someone that, the more it's going to happen, and it did. And the vase broke. So she starts berating the maid. And the maid was a widow. That's why she's a maid. So she has no money. So the Netziv tells her, you can't do that. You can't yell at her like that. She's a widow. If you have a problem, go to court. Take her to Beis Din, right, to the Jewish court. So she says, okay, I will. Right? Rabbis are not known for being calm. They can express themselves pretty well. So she sees her husband's getting his coat on to go to court. She says, I don't need you. I can take care of myself in court. I don't need you to come. He says, I'm not coming for you. I'm coming for her. She's the widow. She's going to come to court, and the judge is going to say to her, so what happened? And she's not going to be able to say, because you're her boss. She needs you to make a living. She's not going to be able to represent herself, so I will do it. I'm going to represent her. Because I'm not coming for you, though. I'm coming for her. Because she's a widow, and she needs extra help. Right? So you see how he understood that. And then they have another one with, say that Chaim of Brisk, that would have been one of the Soloveitchiks from way back, says that he was one time, there was two stories about him. One is it says that a guy, he was such a kind man that one time a guy walks up to him who borrowed money from him and says, you're a fool, Rabbi. I borrowed money from you and you never came to ask me for it back. You don't care. And he says, no, that's not true. I went out of, there's a law that says I'm not allowed to pressure you to pay me back, right? So I purposely didn't go by your house, right? Purposely, so you shouldn't think that I'm trying to pressure you, right? When I expected that when the terms were up, you would pay me back. But in the meantime, I'm not supposed to be reminding you, right? So he went out of his way to be kind to this person, right? But how do you get like this great rabbi who some person insults like that? Like, can you imagine that you borrow money from somebody, he doesn't ask you for it back, and you insult him? So the point is that this rabbi was such a kind man that chances are nobody else would lend this guy money. He was like a pain in the neck to everybody. Like, why else would he talk like that? Right? So nobody lent him money, so they went to the rabbi. The rabbi would lend him money because he's a nice guy. So the rabbi lends him money, and it shows you how nice he is, because he lends his money when nobody else would, and the guy comes and insults him just like he would anyone else, right? And the rabbi takes it, right? So then the next part of the story is that the rabbi one day is walking home, and he sees a child crying, and he knows the child. He's an orphan, and he says, "Why are you crying?" He says, "The kids want to play. We want to play, but we want to play horse and rider, but they say I got to be the horse, and I don't want to be the horse. They always make me the horse. And why? Because he doesn't have any parents. He's poor. He's this kid, right? They always, they're going to ride in his back." So Rav Chaim says, "No, I'm going to be the horse." So this great rabbi, right? He says, "I'm going to be the horse," and he would take the kids on his back and he'd ride them around. And then it says that one time his assistant's walking by and he sees that Rav Chaim is attached to a tree. They tied rope around him, because he tied the rope around the horse to keep him so he doesn't wander away, right? Now he could get away, right? But he's standing there. He says, "What are you doing?" Like, "Well, I'm tied to a tree." He says, "So untie yourself." He says, "No." He says that the poor kids, they'll be all upset. So he says, "Then I'm going to untie you." He says, "No, go get the kids." So he goes and gets the kids, so the kids should come back to untie him, right? Because he wanted the orphan to feel a part of things. So if the rabbi allowed himself to be the horse, right, the other kids would say, "Hey, this guy's got, he's got connections. The rabbi is his horse. We have to treat him nice," right? So that's how we understand it. And they tell stories like with the Chafetz Chaim, that you had people who would. It wasn't uncommon in Europe where the government would come in and they would say in a city, "We need 10 people for the army." Right? We want 10 people, and they would pick 10 people, and some of them were rich people. So the rich people would try to buy their way out, right? So they would get an orphan kid, and they'd make him go, and they'd buy their way out, so they wouldn't have to go, because the guy had to have 10 people, right? So instead of taking my kid, right, you take the orphan kid, and I'll give you $1,000. And that's what they would do. Chafetz Chaim heard these stories, and he would tell them, you shouldn't do this. Not only is it wrong to do in general, he says, but God watches orphans. You're going to get punished. And time and again, it happened that the people were punished, because God takes this very seriously. You have to treat You have to treat everyone well, but people who have extra pain and clearly you see that being lonely, not having a partner, not having a parent is considered an enormous pain, to suffering for a person. So then God makes sure that those people are treated right. That's why he says, my wrath shall blaze and I shall kill you by the sword. Right? It's not a small thing for God to say. He doesn't say that if you are mean to the rabbi, and you're mean to an accountant. He says, if you're mean to the widow or the orphan, I'll do that. Then the last line on this page is, when you lend money to my people, to the poor person who is with you, do not act toward him as a creditor. Do not lay interest upon him. So it's a funny statement. First it says, when you lend money to my people, right? Because if you look in the Hebrew, it begins, im kesef talave. Im it doesn't mean when, it means if. If, you've got money, right? A guy comes to you for a loan. So if you lend money to him, you can't charge interest. That makes sense. That's not what it is. They're telling you based on the Talmud, it doesn't mean if, it means when. Because the Torah is telling us here, is a mitzvah to lend money to other Jews. If a Jew needs money, you have a mitzvah, and you have money, you have a mitzvah to lend him money at no interest, to help him. Right? And you do not act towards him like a creditor. It was like the story with Rabbi Soloveitchik, that it says the whole story was that between the synagogue and his house, the shortest way was past this guy's house. And he would walk that way every day. But after he let the guy borrowed money from him, he went a longer way, so as not to walk in front of his house, so the guy shouldn't think that he's coming to pressure him to get his money back. Right? That's what it means. You shouldn't act to him like a creditor. You shouldn't treat him like he's a second-class citizen, and you can't charge interest. Right? Charging interest in and of itself is not evil. Right? When a bank lends you money for your mortgage, it's not evil that they charge you interest. Right? You might not want to pay it, but why is it any different than when if I want to go out of town and get a car, I have to pay to rent a car. Right? A guy takes his money, he buys 10 cars, and he rents out 10 cars. Right? Is there anything wrong with him making a profit on renting me a car? Not at all. So how come if I have a business of money and I rent money to people, you want to buy a house? I'll rent you the money to buy the house. And the guy whose house it is not going to let you do it. You need $1 million? I'll lend you $1 million and you pay me back $1 million too, but you do it over 30 years. Right? So you say, okay, fine. Right? What's wrong with that? Why is it any different than renting a car? Then you have to pay $10 more than it costs me every day, and I make that money. So the fact is, it's not evil. There's nothing wrong with it. But the Torah is telling you a message that if you lend money to a stranger, I understand you want to charge interest. But if your brother would come to you, right, and you'd say, I'm in trouble. I don't have any money. I can't pay my bills. Can you lend me money? Right? Would you charge your brother interest? No, of course not. It's your brother. You lend him the money and he's got to pay you back, right? So the Torah is telling you here that all Jews are your brothers. You have to treat all Jews like brothers. If a Jew comes to you and he's suffering because he made a mistake with money and now he owes more money than he's got and he can't pay the bill, and he comes to you for a loan, give him the loan and don't charge him interest. Because you charge him interest, he's going to be worse off than he was to start. If he owes $1,000 to someone and you charge him $1,100, now at the end of that he owes $1,100, not $1,000. And then he borrows money from someone else, he ends up owing $2,000. He'll never get out of debt his whole life. So don't charge him interest. Because you wouldn't charge your brother interest, don't charge another Jew interest. That's why it's such a serious thing, because the Torah wants us to understand our relationship to each other. We're family. Right? Then it goes through about giving false witness, accepting bribes. There's a real interesting one on the top of 435 that we can conclude with. It says, if you see the donkey as someone you hate, crouching under its burden, would you refrain from helping him? You shall help repeatedly with him. So here's a scene, okay? You're driving home, and you see a car in front of you, and a car like 100 yards in front of that. The car in front of you is your friend. It's a friend of yours. He's got a flat tire. And the car 100 yards past it is your worst enemy. He also has a flat tire. Okay? So now you got two people, two cars with flat tires. They're both Jewish. Which one do you help? Do you help your friend who's closer? Do you help your enemy who's further? Do you do triage like a doctor and say, the one who's closer, it makes a difference who it is, I have to help the one that's closer? Or do you say, I got to help someone, why not help my friend? I'm certainly not going to help my enemy, I don't like him. Right? He did something terrible to me. So I'm going to help the guy I like, or not the one I don't like. So if you'd ask this, like to Mr. Ethicist in the New York Times, right, he would probably tell you, your friend. Like, why not? You have to, an ethical person would help, right? So you at least help your friend first. Then if you want to help your enemy too, okay, you don't want to, just because you don't like him doesn't mean you want him to be dead. Right? So the Torah's answer is that you help your enemy first, not your friend. And the reason is because you have to help each one of them. Right? You have an obligation to help somebody. But you also have an obligation to improve yourself. And you are working on your character by helping your enemy, because you shouldn't have an enemy. The fact that another Jew is your enemy, even if they deserve it, even if they're a bad guy, I don't mean evil, but they're selfish, right? And because of it, they've done something that nice to you. Nevertheless, you have an obligation to help him, and you have an obligation to care for all Jews. Therefore, you have to go and help the guy you don't like, because you not only have to help him, but you are now helping fix your character so that you won't dislike him. Because the one rule we know is that if I want someone to like me, what do I do to get them to like me? Most people would say, well, give them a gift. Like, I know that, let's say you like computers, I'll give you an Apple computer, and then you like me. That's not true, though. That won't work. What will happen is a person will feel indebted to you, and they really won't like you. Try. How do you feel about the bank that gave you a mortgage? You like them? Not anymore, right? You were ready to kiss them when you got the mortgage, but not since you've been paying them back, right? Even though they're treating you fine. So it's the same idea here. When a person needs to understand that we have to work on our character to improve ourselves, to make ourselves better people, even if someone has done something bad to us. So we go out of our way here specifically to help the person who we don't get along with, so that we should be better people, right? Not necessarily he should be a better person, but we should be, and he gets helped. Then you go help your friend. Now, if you would say this in society, they'd never believe you. Right? Like I said, the ethicists would never believe it. This shows you another example of why these laws came from God. Because no human being would tell you should help your enemy before you help your friend. Can you imagine being the friend and seeing the guy will go right past you and helping your enemy? Chances are, if this guy's your friend, the other guy's his enemy too. Right? But nevertheless, that's how you're supposed to do it. Because you have to not only help, but you have to also help yourself. And that's how you do it. And so that's what it says. Then you have all the laws of bribery, right? That the one thing that it tells us about bribery that's important here to know is that bribery, it says, blinds the eyes of the wise. It doesn't mean it only blinds the eyes of the wise, it blinds my eyes too, and everybody else. But what it means is that it makes you unable to be objective. Right? Bribery does not necessarily mean that you took money. It can mean somebody did a favor for you. Like, even as small as, you're going into a parking lot and a guy gets you go first, right? And then you walk into court and there he is. You're the judge and he's the litigant. You're going to treat him differently, even if he had no intent to bribe you. But because he did something nice for you, you're going to treat him better. Because you say, this guy must be an honest guy. Look what he did. He didn't even know who I was, and look how he did what he did. Right? So the fact is, you can't be fair now. So that's considered a bribe. Right? The Torah doesn't mean only where somebody comes up and illegally gives you money. It means if anyone does something that causes you to be subjective. This is why you can't be a judge for your family. You can't be a witness for your family, because you are going to be subjective. That's why in many cases we have this issue. Right? And if somebody does something for you that's nice, you're going to be favorable to them. And if someone does something that's not, you will not be favorable. You'll do the opposite. And we see it all the time with people that some, you walk into a store and somebody's just friendly in the store, you have a whole different feeling about the store than if nobody's friendly. Right? It's a different feeling. You feel like you're wanted, like you're appreciated. Right? So that's what it's telling us here as well.